Good afternoon, morning, night, wherever you're at. I don't know. We've got people from all over the world today, Dustin. Let's just say that. Tuning in, hear us talk about cyber insurance today. Uh, so, welcome everyone. Ronnie Bergeron here, your cybersecurity technical fellow over at Sherweb. Joining me today to talk about cyber insurance is Mr. Dustin Bolander with Beltex. Dustin, you want to talk a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I've been doing the MSP thing since about 2008. And a couple of years ago, cyber insurance became such a huge pain in the butt that rather than running away, I ran towards the burning building, and I'm now licensed in all 50 states. And we set up Beltex to not just bring in cyber insurance into the MSP industry, but we actually have our own policy. And so it's the only policy where MSPs get pulled into the claims process and reimbursed for helping recover their clients.
Yeah, fantastic. And forgot to mention when we started this is me and Dustin's second insurance talk.
The sequel.
We had set a record on our original discussion at Sherweb for number of attendees, so we're hoping we shatter records again today, right? Like talking about the best topic in the industry, right? Insurance.
The record is what's important here.
Record is, yeah, no education required. We just want to get those numbers up because I was told we have rookie numbers now on our webinar. We have to pump that up a little bit. So, all right, today we're going to go over a lot of topics, right? Last time, Dustin talked a lot about the insurance side of things, right, from his perspective, dealing in 51 states, hopefully soon, right? We don't know. Might have a 51st state soon, but no, in 50 states in the U.S., right? And making sure that people understood the insurance side of things. But today, we're going to change the course a little bit and say, hey, let's talk a little bit about the cyber readiness programs. How do we price them? How do we pitch them? How do we talk about them? What they should entail? And so Dustin is a fantastic resource for this because he spent time on both sides of the aisle. Let's go on and talk about our first one. So, like, Dustin, we'll talk about like a readiness program, right? Like, how do we start, right? So I'm an MSP, right? Like I have clients coming to me with their questionnaires, right? And I help them answer it, but there's more that goes into making sure that they continuously evaluate that we're meeting these requirements and or even getting them up to snuff on those requirements. So what do we do, right? How do we start?
Yeah, so it's as much as people cuss insurance, I do think it's been a great thing for the MSP industry because we sat there for years begging, pleading, yelling at our clients to turn on MFA. Oh, Roddy, it's kind of inconvenient having to, tap that do accept prompt once a day. And then the minute they get that insurance questionnaire saying, like, Roddy, why haven't you turned this on yet? So from that perspective, getting a lot of those fundamentals in place. And then you're seeing that insurance is slowly adding more and more requirements. So it sort of gives you I always tell MSPs, don't use that as your roadmap, right? But do use it as kind of that stick to drive your clients a little bit where you're struggling maybe to get them to do certain basic things, additional email hygiene, security awareness training. The security awareness industry, I think, has been driven. Somebody told me the other day, like 80% of the new business coming in security awareness was because of insurance. So it's really pushing a lot of those basic foundational controls along. So rather than being reactive, your customer comes to you and says, hey, I just got this insurance questionnaire. Where are we at? Is you want them, you're having that conversation regularly. You have a kind of a plan in place already. They're coming to you saying, hey, Roddy, guess what? You're right. Insurance is asking for these three things. Can you give me those proposals that you talked to me about? So just kind of proactively having that conversation, having a roadmap and a plan in place is the important goal here.
Yeah, and look, I get it, right? Like from my time dealing with it, like so our two main verticals, and I think I've said this before at our MSP was legal and insurance. Like the two funnest.
That's why we get along so well. Yeah, we're both psychos.
The two most fun types of people to talk to: attorneys and insurance providers. No offense to the attorneys or insurance providers on the call today, but it's a different beast when you're talking with like construction or you're talking with engineering or architecture, those doctors, whatever. Like, it's a different conversation to be having, but you don't want to walk into those conversations and not have answers and not be able to talk the language, right? Especially with in insurance. So So if I'm an MSP, right, and I'm trying to walk into those conversations, like what should I talk about, or what should I be knowledgeable about from an insurance readiness program to be ready to have those discussions with a potential client?
Yeah, so a couple different pieces. The first one is be aware of and I think we're going to cover this in a couple slides, the general foundational controls that across the board, pretty much every carrier, every application is going to be looking for. Another piece that I've seen a lot of MSPs, and I think this one is more the insurance industry's fault, on a lot of this stuff, you're not going to see an ROI, right? There's not going to be spend this and you're going to save this much money. One piece that you will see is that, especially if it's a more sensitive industry, legal being one of those, healthcare comes up a lot, education, sort of those higher risk ones, they may not qualify for a policy without it. But if you're going in there and saying, hey, Roddy, buy this MDR and you're going to save that much on your insurance policy, whenever they get that quote back and they're not saving, they're going to, not be very happy with you. So don't try to use the pitch of you're going to save a bunch of money on your insurance policy. It is, you need this to meet the requirements. It's going to get you better coverage. It's that kind of thing. It is not hey, you're going to save a bunch of money. So don't say that. And again, I think the insurance industry has been kind of bad about setting that expectation. Small business, that you rarely see that. Larger businesses, you'll start getting a return on that. But I mean, I'm talking, hundreds to thousands of employees at that point. So foundational controls, have that working awareness of it. It's not an ROI, it's good security. Insurance is going to offset it some, but then at that point you're being covered. And then finally, the best time to talk about incident response and kind of planning around and all that is whenever you're talking about insurance. So use that as a segue into that conversation also.
Yeah, there's indirect ROI though, right? Like stuff that you don't think about. And I can talk about from my time in incident response. So you think about, not only downtime, but loss of reputation. How do you quantify loss of reputation, right? And the amount of money it takes to rebuild a client base, or potential loss of contracts, right? So, oh my goodness, I can't tell you how many times we'd go dig into business contracts, and it's like, all right, you have to have cyber insurance, and you have to, you have to meet these certain requirements, and you don't meet them, something bad happens, and the business that you're working with, the vendor you're working with, comes to you and says like, hey, like you said you were meeting these requirements, you weren't, and we're going to pull that contract, right? So like there's a lot of discussions you can have about the potentials of what could happen, right? It's not to spread fear, right? We don't want to have people scared of like, hey, like you don't want to sell fear based, because that's very rarely ever works. But you have to talk in terms of business and business outcomes, and
they have to be thinking about it at least.
Yeah, right. And you got to talk about bottom line, because that's, I mean, at the end of the day, and I hope I don't overstep my boundary here, but like we live in a capitalist society for the most part, right? Like our whole goal when we start a business, or we take on the risk of opening our doors or starting an LLC or whatever, like we want to make money, right? Most of us don't want to live in a Scrooge McDuck vault of money, but like we want to have a comfortable life. So like, yes, we do want to make money at the end of the day, and so that resonates with people whenever you can discuss their outcomes and their.
You definitely don't want to lose your shirt over your shirt in your business over a incident that you weren't prepared for. So yeah.
And tying that back to the readiness program, that's the whole point, right? Like we want to make sure you're ready for these for your insurance. We want to make sure that the requirements that your insurance has, that you continue to meet those, because it's not a one and done thing. It's like any kind of compliance, right? Like you can go and check a bunch of boxes off in January, and by March you'll have to go and recheck and make sure that those boxes are still checked. It's a constant change, a constant process, because I mean, you've got, as an MSP, things changing all the time, right? Like I used to do quality control checks on certain items like once a year, twice a year, and you'd be surprised the amount of things that go and change when you once set them, because like techs are changing things to see if things work and not changing them back, or devices are being deployed on the network and you don't know about it, or
I'm taking this guy off at MFA for 24 hours while we troubleshoot this thing.
He lost his phone. I can't tell you how many times. So we used, I'm not going to name the third party provider. We use a third party MFA provider, and they'd be like, "Oh, we lost our phone. We're going to put your MFA in bypass mode for a day or something, or we could give you a code, a bypass code for a day or something like that." And that day would turn into a month before someone would be like, "Why are you still using that bypass code?" So you'd be surprised at the amount of things that slip through the cracks that a good readiness program can help. And the whole point being that when something bad happens and you have to go and the insurance starts combing through your network or starts asking you questions about how this incident happened, the controls you put in place that you said you put in place were actually in place. Because those things change from your baselines and the checks you did 3 months ago don't always pan out the same way, right? And we could talk about things like building, the stack that's involved in everything, but like the other part to this that I want to is that insurance isn't just asking questions about firewalls and endpoint protection and MFA in place, but also like what processes and procedures do you have in place, especially around like incident response, right? Because that's a big part of like what do you do? So like, are you as an insurer or someone who's knowledgeable in the insurance industry, like what are you seeing around those plans and processes, right? Or are they starting to get more detailed? Are they asking if you have one? Like what's that starting to look like?
Tiny bit. So yeah, that's absolutely become a big part of it. So you hit the nail right on the head earlier, right? It's when something happens. You didn't say if. So incidents are going to happen. One of the big things around that, your processes and people part of it is one thing that comes up frequently. If you look at, let's say you go out, you get a shiny $5 million cyber insurance policy. That's going to include financial fraud coverage, but still just 250,000. There's a couple carriers that will do 500,000, but it's still pretty limited, right? And the reason is there's a lot of claims around that. So say that you're the best MSP in the world, you got your customer locked down perfectly, everything's done, vendor gets hacked, right? And they redirect that payment. It was from a legitimate email address. It's a real thing. So what can you do at that point? Security awareness training. And now the carriers are starting to ask, or not now, they have been, but they're starting to say, do you have multiple factors of verification? When Roddy emails me and says, hey, I got a new bank account, change my payment here, do you pick up the phone? Do you do that kind of thing? So they are starting to look a lot more at that aspect of it. On our Beltex policy, we expect to see a written disaster recovery plan that also includes business continuity as well, and incident response. So it's kind of those three aspects of it. Still not super tight. It drives the GRC guys crazy because they're like, oh, great. So you can have a one-page incident response plan and check yes on the box. Most carriers, yeah, that is the case. But do you have something? It's a lot better than nothing. But you're going to see a lot more around that now. That insurance is starting to catch on, that the people that are prepared. I actually just had a claim that I worked the other day, and the MSP was really well prepared. The client was down. It was like a 100-person company. The client was partially down for about 24 hours, and that was it. Somebody got a foothold onto the network. Things got shut down quickly. Reacted. IR got in there, and it was just so well contained. Those are the kind of people joke about insurance doesn't want to pay claims. We don't want to pay big claims, right? We want to sit here and pay $200,000 claims all day long, not $2 million claims.
Yeah, it's not.
And so that's where
UNICEF. We're not giving things away, right?
Yeah, it's not a charity, but we do, and I mean, there's even regulations around that where there's expectation a certain amount are paid out. But that's where you're starting to see these policies really help. Is on those funds transfers, you're able to catch a lot of that stuff or claw back quickly, things like that. So the policy part is, as we talk through this, as an MSP, be thinking about that. Because the other part is trusted advisor, right? Every MSP out there wants to be the trusted advisor. Oh, great, we got this security awareness training. We got this, that, and the other. You got to make sure you're checking all those boxes, but a lot of your competitors are too. Start talking about policies, procedures. Like Roddy said, great, you deploy something, you're not done at that point. You got to make sure you're constantly fine-tuning it. There's new settings. Microsoft will keep us busy till the day that we die, updating new settings and deploying new stuff, right, through 365. So just that ongoing roadmap.
Yeah, for sure. And we talked about this before. I don't know if it was in the last webinar or just me and you's conversation about, actuary data and how, we can't look at the last 5 years. It's literally the last 2 years, and that's changing. And the way that insurance is changing constantly, like that's where the advisor position comes in. Because if you're a trusted advisor and you're staying on top of things, you should be able to predict what's going on and look for the trends and be ahead of the game, right? Because as I tell MSPs out there, like you go in a room and you ask a room of people who's offering security services, and everybody's hand shoots up. And I go, how many people here are following a framework right? Like, who's following a security methodology? Like, you'll get 3 hands in a room of 20. And it's like, so there's a differentiation there that you have to go after to put you ahead of someone else. And so the people who are charging, $30 a head for security and the people who are charging 200, like, what's the difference, right? Like, what's the two differences between the services you're offering? And that's the key differentiator, is that you're offering something that somebody else cannot or may not be able to, right? And like the policies and the processes and those bits of it, the ones that'll start to align and get you ingrained with like what their goals are as a business, right? Like that's a value that you can't put on paper, right? Like, you used to ask, like, I always tell people, like, when we go talk to a client and someone, another MSP would go pitch to them, like, why didn't you pitch them? They're like, cheaper than you. We don't feel like we got the value out of it. And like, feel and value in the same sentence, to me, someone who understands, who used to do financial audits, does not, like, that does not cross to me, like, that doesn't make sense. Like, it's either a value dollar wise or you have a feeling about it, right? But like, when someone feels, when they attach emotion to that value, or they feel like it, like, you can't quantify that. And for a business, that's I could tell you that's how you keep loyal customers. And unless you get somebody like me who goes in and be like, what are you paying for? Like, let's start lining up the balance sheets here and see what you actually. But like, that's part of loyalty and everything else. When you start getting in, you start to align with their business, and they start to feel like you're actually there for them and not just a check.
No, and that's a good the peace of mind. So from that perspective is, we're talking this pricing and packaging. So, okay, you get this great package put together. And at that point, you go in, you're talking to a new prospect. Okay, tell me what's the difference between, you guys. Why should I pick Roddy Tech to, be our new MSP? So, okay, you guys earlier mentioned you went through your cyber insurance renewal. Yeah, it was a pain in the butt. Okay, our cybersecurity package that, we're putting in front of you guys, that's going to check all the important controls for that cyber insurance company. So next year, whenever that happens, you'll be able to go down the list, say yes, 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 yes on these 10 controls, which are the ones they actually care about. And that's going to get you the best coverage available because, we've done our homework. We've talked to the insurance companies that we know what controls they're looking for. And you're allowed to say that. That's from a regulatory standpoint. Everybody's like, oh, you can't talk about. You're not talking about specific numbers. You're not talking about specific carriers. You're totally allowed to say that. And that's going to give them the peace of mind. Nobody's excited about doing their insurance renewal.
Nobody.
Like, it took me a while to come to terms with that. Like, my team would come in all happy and stuff, and the person's just sitting there all depressed because it's just a bunch more paperwork to deal with. The easier you can make that for them, where it's like, great, I don't have to think about it because my MSP has me covered on the controls. That's one less thing, and that again gets you in that trusted advisor seat a lot more firmly.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so we have a question, and I just saw it's like, what are some of the methodologies that we can use to help align? I'm guessing, like, if you want to clarify, like, what can we do to help align insurance requirements with common methodologies, right? So I guess the question to you, Dustin, is when it comes to insurance requirements, are you seeing more insurance companies look to these frameworks, right? Your NIST, your ISOs, your CIS controls, right? Are you seeing them start to look at that and saying, like, these are good controls that we should put in place for our own risk, like, I guess, our own risk questionnaires, right?
Unfortunately not. I know it will happen at some point. The industry is just so slow. There's a couple of carriers that will ask questions around that, but it's not, which CIS controls do you have in place, or, do you have IG1 fully implemented? There's one app I'm thinking of right now, and it says, do you follow a common industry framework such as SOC 2, CIS, ISO, I think. Doesn't even specify which ISO. So no, it's still pretty bad from that perspective.
Do you see a lot of crossover, though, between the risk questions that insurance companies are asking and the stuff you're finding in control? There's still a lot of crossover there, right? So you could pick a framework, let's say CIS, start to follow those, and then because like they'll ask you the same thing, like part of CIS, least privilege access, implementing an FA, blocking access to unused or unneeded software. Like all these different pieces, like you can turn around and say, hey, this is.
If you hit CIS IG1, that plus having a couple of the financial controls in place, like at that point, you're golden for an SMB. And whenever I say SMB, insurance wise, I'm going to say companies under 15 million in revenue, roughly 50 to 100 employees, depending on the industry.
Awesome. Yeah. All right. Great question, though. And here's the other thing too. Like, so we always talk people always say, hey, so how do I like start that conversation with my clients around insurance or their need for insurance, right? And always the story I always tell is we, like, again, dealing with legal, right? Like they had all these business contracts they entered into. So anytime they worked with another vendor, so like, we had attorneys that dealt with like State Farm, or they dealt with, Walmart or whomever, right? Target, Home Depot. They had all the big names, right? They usually signed a contract, right? And that contract specified terms of payment, everything. But then you start getting to the technical requirements, and there's usually a few lines that said like something to the effect of, the party will adhere to the cyber technical controls as specified by vendor or whatever, right? And you then would turn around and say like, well, what are those controls? And then they would send you a humongous sheet, and then like I could guarantee you in 90% of those business contracts, when you start looking at controls, it says, hey, you have to have some level of cyber liability insurance. Like,
at least $1 million in aggregate from a A- rated carrier, blah blah blah.
Yeah. Yep. So like you're starting to see those pop up more or I saw pop up in business contracts. We started requirements. So if you're looking at like, hey, how do I start to have this conversation with clients, and not it seem like it's just a sales pitch or like an upsell or like I'm trying to sell you something else, like ask them that, like, do you have any vendor contracts or business to business contracts already that may already require you to have insurance? And if they say, they're either going to tell you like adamantly yes or I don't know, right? Like no one's going to tell you no, right? Like so the point is, it's a time to go do there. Then this is where your value add comes in. Like, let's sit there and review those contracts. I'm telling you, you're going to find something around security controls, around data that's shared with the organization, or access to their resources, or whatever the clause is that says you have to meet these requirements. And whenever you ask for those requirements, they're going to be massive. Yeah. And
that should come up in whenever you're doing your QBRs, because everybody's a perfect MSP, does them quarterly. But bringing that up. Okay, have you signed any new clients or re-signed the contracts, and what kind of requirements have been in there? Bringing it up and asking, because that's where everybody talks about, government regulation and stuff on cyber insurance. But most of what we're seeing is, I just signed a new client, I'm required to carry it now, can you help, kind of thing. Yeah. Same thing with our MSP partners, where they're bringing in, hey, can I introduce this client to you? They just landed this huge new customer. We're trying to help them upgrade their security, and they need to get cyber insurance as part of it.
Yeah, right. And that comes to the other question, right? So we have our processes in place. We're having the discussions with our clients around it. And it's the same question I get all the time, right? Like, how do we start to price our readiness program, right? Because if you asked me whenever I first started at our MSP, well, how do I price this? I'd be like, I don't know. Let's start at $50 and we'll see if we're profitable or not. Right?
Throw it at the wall.
Yeah. That's how we started, right? When we started our MSP practice, we had our RMM, we had our PSA, we had endpoint antivirus and spam filtering or something like that. That's our first basic offering. And we're like, how much do we price this for? I was like, I don't know, $50. Let's go. Let's see. Let's roll the dice and see what happens. And we were losing. We were hemorrhaging money. It was so bad. So like that question comes like, I always tell people, like, when they ask me these questions, like, I can't give you the exact number, but I can get you in the ballpark, right? So, Dustin, are you coming across this? Like, you getting a lot of questions around that from your clients, like especially MSPs, like, hey, what do we do? What do we price? How do we look at this?
Yeah, a lot of it ends up being is, and I think we're going to touch on this a little bit, but it's what controls actually matter. What should I be putting in there is kind of that baseline, because these apps don't tell you, right? Some of the questions on the apps don't actually impact the rate at all or the qualification on it. So that's been the big one. And then the other one has been, it comes up a lot, is like, how fast do we need to implement these? And the answer on that is the day the policy starts, unless the carrier puts in writing otherwise. Like sometimes you'll have something that'll say, complete within 60 days sort of thing. But that's been the two biggest pieces. As far as the packaging and, the deployment, so to speak, that one gets a little bit hairier, I guess, because you're going to have some MSPs that are ready to go, but then building from scratch, which I think is a lot of the folks that we're talking to today. Which, perfect timing. We have a spreadsheet. Yeah. Imagine that.
That's if you ever see something from Sherweb, that's a formula that's put out in a spreadsheet. Like, that's my MO, right? Like, I love me a good formula in Excel.
Oh, I was just going to say, I'd be happy if I spent the rest of my career in Excel, man. So, one thing on this is everybody sits there and they're just like, oh, my clients are going to pay for that. Whenever you have if they're sitting there saying, oh, we need this for a customer contract, we need this for insurance kind of thing. Hopefully you've been priming them over the last couple of months sort of thing, right? Talk about it in your QBR, stuff like that. But it's one of those, don't be afraid to ask. You see, I mean, you'd run into this, Roddy, right? All the MSPs were like, they'll never do that. It's like, have you actually tried? Have you put it in front of them? Have you asked that kind of thing? Um, I think some MSPs are going to have sticker shock at these numbers initially, but whenever we're actually working with MSPs doing this stuff, you're going to get yes a significant amount of the time.
Yeah. So part of that, right, and this is the audience will get a link to this in our guide, right? Is I built out a pricing calculator, right? So I sat down and I said, all right, based on my experience as an MSP, right, and the levers I know in our business and some basic numbers, right, what can I do? What can I do to like get us in a ballpark of what I should charge per month, right? So I think it's up on it's up on screen right now, right? Like what happened was I said, okay, so how many possible hours can someone work in a year, right? So like 52 times 40, right? Full-time employee working 52 weeks a year, right? 40 hours a week, right? That gives us 2,080 hours. You start subtracting things like PTO and other things like and their billable percentages and label multiplier because your employees.
You're not running a sweatshop here, I noticed.
Yeah, like so. Again, like I always tell people, like at the end of the day, it's the labor that our employees put in that pays for like rent and everything else, right? So like there's fixed costs involved in your business. So what's the multiplier that they have to bring in? Because if they bring in just their if you're paying somebody 80,000 a year and they're just bringing in 80,000, like you're losing money, right? That employee's losing money. So you figure that out in the W-2 multiplier, which is like how much dollars should they bring in to be profitable for the business, or how much value should they bring, right? So if you're on a contract basis, right, like there's different ways of figuring that out, but your W-2 numbers, the multiplier. So if you pay them 80,000 a year, by the time you include like payroll taxes and benefits and rent and or cell phone allowances or whatever, right? There's an amount plus the amount you have to make to pay the people who aren't frontline workers, so your back office people. The owner needs to make money too. I mean, if you're an owner and you're not making money, hopefully you are making money. Right, so you put all this in, and it comes out to a multiplier, and you work in your tool costs and everything else. So at the end of the day, and there's another thing too in the spreadsheet when you get a link to it. There's an hourly breakdown, so you can kind of figure out like, hey, here's how much hours I should be putting in for these clients, and then that gives you the number all the way at the bottom of the spreadsheet on screen, which is the charge per month for your insurance program, which will get you in a ballpark, so you're not guessing like how much you should be charging, right? Because like I can tell you, tried and true method is to throw mud at the wall and hopefully it sticks, right? And that's how you figure out your pricing. So,
well, and we hear about these MSPs that are struggling to grow. You can kind of give your time talking as like owner, or even the senior people that have like that owner mentality, right? Where you're going to just work your butt off. That's the number. That's what it takes actually, right? We're looking down there at that $2,000 number. Could you do it for $1,000 whenever you're a team of 4? Yeah, probably, and be fine. But then that's where you have these guys where it's like, man, we're trying to grow and we're just all burned out, right? There is a real cost to doing it. So that's the number you got to shoot for.
Yeah, right. Because you don't want to overextend your workers either, right? Like they're going to need PTO, they're going to need breaks, they're going to get sick, so you have to bake all this time in to the cost, and like that's not a cost that the business should absorb. That should be a cost that ultimately the client absorbs, right? Like, and you want to make sure at the end of the day you're profitable and you can go on your beach cruise every year, right?
Yeah.
All right, so we got some questions coming in. Nick sent me a series of questions. So I have a question from an individual. They said we are moving clients to decentralized cloud services. So primarily Microsoft Modern Work, no on-prem infra, right? So there's no firewalls, there's no physical office, right? So how do you answer questions from when your cyber insurance carrier asks you about traditional infrastructure when the client has moved beyond that? So like remote workers, everything's up in Azure, AVD, you've got Modern Workplace, et cetera. Like, how do you answer those questions from a carrier perspective? What are you looking for?
So two aspects to that. The first one with, okay, they're stuck with that carrier, is you can do write-in stuff on it. So you can put in the application, leave that blank, and then an email. Basically, the goal is to get to the underwriter, meaning the person who's reviewing the application, and say, we could not answer X, Y, and Z because of this. Excuse me. Or take that information, do a Word document, attach it to the back of the application and put it in. That being said, though, is a lot of the times whenever you're seeing that carrier might not be the best option for that more modern environment. There are carriers that recognize that. Didn't mean this as a plug, but thanks, Nick. Our application specifically is we don't look for on-premise stuff. You can do an entire application just based off the cloud services. We're not the only ones, though. There's a lot of others. So that's kind of the two aspects. I know not every MSP can go in and tell their customer, hey, you need to change. So if you're not going to fight that battle, that's the best answer, because you can see a lot of savings moving to a carrier that doesn't look for that more traditional infrastructure, that they're underwriting it more reasonably, right? That they actually understand the technology. But if it's hey, we need to work with this one that they have, you can write in answers. So take it in, mark it up whenever they accept that application. So this is a fun thing that there's a lot of rumors, I guess will be the polite. Can we say misinformation anymore? I don't know.
Yes.
But whenever you put in that application, they are accepting those answers that you gave. So if you say we don't have a office, we don't have a firewall, they can't come back later and be like, oh, you didn't check this for the firewall and ding you for it.
Yeah, and I've always said, there's two things. A, you can ask clarifying questions from your insurance carrier too. Like if you can get somebody on the phone at that point, they're like, hey, in this scenario, I don't have X, Y, or Z, or I have something non-traditional. How do you want me to handle this? Right? Let them guide you a little bit, because you don't want to mark an answer wrong, because that's like when it comes out in the wash after an incident, you could potentially get burned. And the other part too is I'm going to say this gracefully. Sometimes insurance carriers aren't up to date with technology, right?
Like I can say that. A lot of them are not up to date on technology.
So sometimes it's an educational thing too, right? So we would have a question on a questionnaire that's like, do you use a VPN to remotely access resources? Okay. Now, the heart of that question is, do you allow remote access to resources, right? I think that's the heart of the question, to understand the risk there. But we didn't. But we had a SASE solution. So it's not a VPN technically, but it's VPN-like. So we'd have to educate them on yes, we do allow remote access, but it's through a different technology called this. How would you like us to use this? Or if you're using zero trust network access, how do you want us to answer this? Because it's not always apples to apples, the question they're asking versus what they're actually trying to glean out of it. Yep. They're trying to make it easy for you to ask. They're trying to make it easy for you to answer, so they can then go ahead and ascertain the risk, right?
Right.
And so sometimes the questions aren't worded the way they expect them to be. Same thing with exposed services, right? We'll see that all the time. It's all right, well, what are you looking for? So are you looking for things specifically like FTP or RDP, or are you looking for web services that are exposed?
Admin panels is the big ones.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
I could spend an hour talking about all the incidents I worked where you had firewalls with exposed admin interfaces and default passwords.
But yeah, whenever you have those applications, it's literally, and I'm talking small business, the bigger the company gets, the more kind of hands-on, handcrafted insurance it is. Mm-hmm. But small businesses, it's a dude turns around and punches it into an Excel spreadsheet, right? So it's trying to get as just black and white, yes, no, as it can. But unfortunately, like you said, the understanding and just the amount of nuances and stuff, that a lot of time it's not there. So more information is going to be to your benefit and protection.
Yeah, for sure. And then another question, right? So they say, I've reached out to a number of carriers to ask what their minimum requirements are for cyber policies based on policy value. Only one carrier was able to provide minimum requirements. Most others would either say they don't speak to the public or say they don't want to disclose that information. Why is that? And how do we get that information if we want to?
Oh, geez. It is incredibly frustrating to me. So I'll tell you guys, even with access to all the carriers that I have, I can probably tell you that answer on about 10 of them. The industry is a little bit standoffish between each other and stuff like that. It's proprietary, this, that, and the other. I don't know that this is a good answer. It's just kind of the nature of the beast. That was one of the things that frustrated me about it as well, which is why we did our applications online, and it clearly says yes or no. This is required to get an answer on it. But I don't know on some of these why it's not more transparent. The best answer I can give you is it's right now that the rates are kind of staying down and going down, is everybody's competing for new business. So I think it's a little bit of a old school, I'm not going to say good or bad, but an old school sales mentality of, get us all the information, then let me give you the pitch kind of thing. You don't want to turn people off up front. But I missed the name of whoever asked that question. But yeah, I hate that part of the industry. I don't think there's a good reason for it, at least in the, small business side of things.
Yeah, whenever we first started out with this, like when we were trying to build our cyber readiness program, we were like, we don't know what the insurance companies want. So we just reached out to them and we were like, hey, we're interested in getting insurance, right? And they would send us their questionnaire and I'd be like, yoink. So I don't know if that's illegal. I may have just admitted to something illegal, but I yoinked those questions and I started building a master sheet out of it to say like, all right, what am I seeing the most common of? What is it that I'm seeing uniquely that I think that's interesting, or which ones I think are completely stupid, right? And so I would just, and that's just based off of like looking at the different things and like what would I would ask as a cybersecurity practitioner. So like, I remember one I got, and the interesting question was do you have a data flow diagram? And I was like, oh my god, who has?
That's next level.
Yeah, who has a data flow diagram? But the answer, I mean, the realization was like, man, I probably should start doing this for my clients though. Like, and if I'm going to have a readiness program to help ascertain where risks are at or to help them mitigate risk, like I need to know where their data is going and coming and who has access to it. So like it opens up a lot of interesting questions, even though I thought it was pretty dumb because like my data flow diagram could just be like two circles with a line that says data go out, data go in. And like that's a data flow.
You sitting there with your crayons, like drawing out the.
That's my ingress and egress. Data go out internet. Data come in internet. And like, but like that really sparked an interesting question. It's like how do we drive values? We start asking clients about where do you hold data at? Like what controls do you have in place over that data? And like you can find some things that maybe you answered incorrectly on an insurance questionnaire because you didn't know they had data in Dropbox, or they had data in Google Drive, or they had a public facing website that had some forms they could download or other data or other information, right? And you start to unpack that a little bit. You start to understand the scope of where their business touches and the technologies they use, or whether or not they don't even know they use technologies, right? But again, going back to
that's a good point. On these applications, so one of the things we're going to talk about is that some of the questions are more weighted than others, and some of them aren't actually going to impact your rate. All these things are good discussion points.
Yeah.
That's the biggest piece. Like maybe you don't need a data flow diagram, maybe you don't have one, but hey, it came up on this insurance application. Like now you have an excuse to talk about it with your client, right?
Yeah.
So that's another good thing is let the insurance companies ask what may be dumb questions, but then leverage those to have a discussion of, you know what, Roddy, we've never really talked about that before. I know you guys have some cloud services that, we really, as your MSP, we really don't mess with that much. Can we talk about how those, are important to your business? And then next thing you know, you're signing a project to implement SSO across 4 cloud platforms.
Yeah, and like that's the thing too. Like we're talking a lot about questionnaires as well. And I know I'm getting sidetracked. Like Nick's flagging me. He's like, "You got 20 minutes left, Ronnie, and you still got a lot to cover." So he's doing a time check. We're
doing our normal rambling.
Oh yeah, this is normal rambling. But like, look, you start to see more insurance carriers too start to tie into your tools, your Office 365, your Sentinel ones or your Huntresses or whatever you have, right? You're starting to see them say like, hey, we're going to have access into it and they'll be able to pull this data in. Do you feel like that's useful to insurance carriers, like from a risk perspective? Do you feel like that's the ways the industry is going to where like questionnaires may not be a thing anymore? It's just we'll pull the data or the answers 100%. Directly from your environments. Okay.
Yep. So fun little segue for 30 seconds was Beltex was previously a kind of a carrier division under a parent company. And one of the other divisions we had actually built out a telemetry platform. So we had this up and running back in 2021 under a different policy with the tie into it. We had 35 connectors, I think, tying into all the RMMs and all that stuff. And yeah, the amount that you can start doing on that side because I heard a couple of years ago, one of the big spam filtering vendors told me, I was talking to one of the product managers and I said, hey, what do you think is the best and the worst spam filters? And he goes, it's Microsoft Defender and Microsoft Defender, just because of the level of configuration you can do on it,
Yeah.
right? So as you start to look at that stuff, it's like, man, this actually matters on, did they just set up a, Palo Alto firewall, but then they threw open RDP? Like there's so many good and bad configurations you can do that, yeah, I think that's absolutely the future. And that's how to get good rates and keep cyber insurance affordable, there's going to have to be a level of telemetry that happens.
Yeah, they asked the magic question. Do you have an email security gateway? Yes, I do. Right.
Yeah.
But what if
How's it configured?
what if I'm whitelisting? Yeah. What if I'm whitelisting half the domains? Or
yeah.
What if I whitelisted all of gmail.com and I'm going to show my age, but like Hotmail and all that,
Proton
right?
Mail.
Yeah. Like if I whitelist those domains, am I really doing myself a service or not? Right.
Right. You might as well not have it at that point.
Or am I ignoring SPF or DMARC or DKIM or any of those other security measures inside of my email gateway? If that's the case, then like it's useless for the most part, right? Yeah. So fantastic conversation. And like I know some people had asked some questions that I purposely skipped because this slide was coming up about building like that foundational package. So like what are the actual controls I need in place or I should put in place if I'm building out a package for my clients around cybersecurity readiness. So these were the considerations that I think Dustin and I sat down and talked about, right, from MFA all the way down to backups, but not just having backups, testing and restoring backups, right, to a specific time frame. Limiting exposed services, that goes back to like VPN services. Can we put that behind like a SASE or a ZTNA instead of just opening VPN services, or again exposing admin interfaces, which we seem to see a lot of lately in the news, especially around firewall vulnerabilities. But then the other part of this, and this is something I think Dustin brought to the table, was like, hey, let's talk about other things like prevention and policies and then financial controls, right? So like, what are you seeing? So I know like when we start talking about financial controls and everything else, like that kind of starts to get out the scope of what MSPs do, right? We live in a technical world. We're not always dealing in the other business hands. What are you seeing around like financial control policies and what are being implemented?
It's still really simple. So the biggest one that comes up is if there is a request to change, a payment account, something along those lines, do you have multiple methods of verification? So a vendor puts in, hey, Roddy, I need you to, update our payment information. We have a new bank account. At that point, pick up the phone, do something else. The other side of it being, are multiple people within the company required to verify a payment over a certain amount? And so, yeah, you're right. That gets a little bit outside the controls. I think it's a good idea, though, for MSPs. I'm going to say dip your toes in a little bit. Kind of the same thing. A lot of people would say HIPAA training is outside of the MSP's domain also, but everybody's out there packaging and selling it, right?
Yeah.
So from that same perspective, and if you guys shoot an email over to us on the Beltec side, I don't know, you got me locked down on chat pretty good, man. I can't put my email in chat.
There's people asking like, hey, Dustin, if I contact you, can you share the secrets to the cyber insurance industry? And I'm like,
yeah,
yes, Dustin will.
Nick Garati hopefully will be nice enough to put my email address in there. But so just a basic financial template of here's some controls, one page. Again, the insurance requirements are pretty light, but think of it in kind of that same thing as phishing, right? You're teaching these people to protect themselves from phishing. That's just another step. Hey, Roddy, here's something you guys should be looking at. Insurance really wants this. That's another major step towards that trusted advisor role. So those financial controls, again, super lightweight. And then the other part of that too is the incident response. Even a one-page incident response plan is still good enough for most insurance policies whenever they're looking for it. And that really gets your customers thinking on a higher level, gets you more ingrained in the business. So I highly recommend doing that. We're talking about, basic stuff, backups, security awareness training, things like that. Most of your competitors are doing that. I guarantee you only a couple of your competitors are going to be talking about the incident response plans with regards to insurance and the financial controls also.
Yeah, I always go back to like the first business plan I ever wrote was one page, right? Yeah. Like it was very simple. I didn't know what I was doing, but like it was the first step. your first step doesn't have to be grandeur. Like your first boat ride's not going to be across the ocean. Hopefully, like you're gonna get in a boat in a pond somewhere, and you're gonna row around, or you have your 15 horsepower Johnson motor or whatever scooter. Like the first time you do something, it's not going to be grand, right? But you improve upon it. You do your next thing. You do your next thing, and eventually, you're doing something great, and you turn around and go like, man, I started off doing it very simple, but you have to start somewhere. That's it, and that's every business, right? So I'm getting flagged that we have to move on to the next part, right? And that's so we go to pitch, we go to talk to our clients, right? And hopefully in a perfect world, they'll be gung ho to pay us more money and take our services, but we know that's not the reality, right? Like, so we're going to go over some common objections on screen, and from your perspective, Dustin, like let's talk a little bit about it. So first scenario, right? You walk in and clients like, we don't need that. We're too small to be hit. Very common thing that we hear all the time. So what do you say to
that? 0 days are still going to get you. I mentioned I had a claim that I was working on last week. I don't think we're going to name any firewall vendors today, but there was one that had yet another 0 day. Stuff happens. The phishing attacks get through. I was talking to a financial services company the other day, and there is a guy getting sued. His email got phished. He got a business email compromise on his mailbox. Bunch of stuff went out to other people, and then they managed to extort one of those other people. And that person that got extorted is suing him. So that actually falls under cyber insurance as a coverage. Yeah. Hopefully you're not dealing with business email compromise, but whenever that kind of stuff happens, and these weren't targeted attacks, right? They're just the drive-by. They're going bam, bam, bam down the line, hitting as many people as they can, and it just happened to get that business. So stuff is going to happen. It's in the news enough that I hope they would accept it. But it's not. No, they're not targeting your, Roddy's boat shop, but they're going to hit a range of IP addresses in Louisiana, and you're going to have one of those IP addresses, and you might get popped. So,
yeah, and that kind of ties into an article I was reading today from Bleeping Computer about ransomware extortion payments, or like what we can track in the blockchain. Those payments to known ransomware groups is going down, but the number of what the correlating data to that is that to compensate for that loss of extortion payments, because we're getting better at doing restores and everything else, is that the number of attacks are going up. Right. Yeah. So like they're in the business to make money. So if they see their revenue drop, well, same thing you do in a business. Your revenue starts to drop, and you go, all right, sales, like kick it into overdrive and go make more money. As the same thing's happening in the world. Like the attacks are starting to ramp up, despite the fact that extortion payments are down. So too small to be a target, right? Like we see all the time. I always say, and this is what we did, is the best way to overcome that objection is you can give them facts and figures all day long, but a good story is always good as well. Like you hit them with some figures. Look, I had tons of examples. I had a doctor's office, right? One doctor, 6 staff. They got hit with ransomware back in like 2016 to 2017, something like that. No backups, no nothing. They closed their doors within 8 months, right? Like he never fully recovered. Jeez. Paid the ransomware, didn't get his files back. Was pretty much hosed, had to start all over. But he lost so many patients. He was down for over a week. He was down for like 4 days before he actually called anybody because he didn't know what to do. So like, it is, and while those stories are sad and tragic, right? Like it helps drive the fact home that like they probably never heard about this because those stories don't make the paper. They're too mundane, yeah. They're too small, but they do happen. And the more you dig into it, the more you start to hear about it, right? Next, like cyber insurance is too expensive, right? Why should I pay X amount of dollars every year whenever I've never had to use it before?
I hate this one because it's more expensive. It's a lot more expensive than nothing. Okay, I'll give you that. But no, I put that so down at the bottom, like I put on our numbers, because I can sit there and quote all day long. If you're this company, then it'd be this much, that much. I mean, you're looking a couple $1,000s. That's why a lot of times these warranties drive me nuts too, because they're talking about that and it's just as expensive. I mean, we're regularly seeing policies. I think half the policies we've done this year have been under $2,000. And I'm not talking small companies either. One that I literally just was hands-on with yesterday, $7 million a year mortgage company, it's going to be under $3,000 for cyber insurance. Like, it's not in the big scheme of things, right? For getting $2 million of coverage in case something happens, that's not that much. And the other part too, that for the expensive, a lot of people, like the companies, will say, well, Roddy, you're my MSP, like you can recover us. Don't try to fight that argument, right? No, it's not covered in your contract or anything. That is a argument you're usually not going to win, or that's not even worth having. But at that point, the cyber insurance brings in legal, they bring in forensics. Do you really want, Roddy's MSP up there doing PR for you? Like, no, they're going to bring in professional PR people, lost income, all the other stuff outside of the core, restoring from backups. There's a lot that goes into these policies.
Yeah, and as I used to tell our clients too, right? You got to pay less than $3,000 or whatever, right, for your insurance. For us to walk into an incident, by the time we got our team in and we got forensics in, and any kind of post reporting or breach victim notifications or whatever, right? I'd be like easily 80 to 100K is like what I'd say before you would even touch. And this is just base price, right? Because for our team to go in there and I'm going to not use my normal language, but to untangle a network, right? For us to get forensics involved, for us to do a 30 to 45 day post engagement to make sure there still wasn't activity on the network. Because even though you kick anybody out, if you don't do a good enough job, there's a potential that they'll just jump right back into the network. Or if you don't find the vulnerability that let them get in or the pathway, so you got to do an engagement with them. You got to figure out exactly how they got it. You got to do all this work, and then that's just the technical side. You have all the notification reporting and potential payment of credit monitoring and everything else. Like, I'd be like, hey, just for us to come step in, you don't have 80K. Then we're not even going to talk. So I don't even know if you're going to be able to pay me. Your business is under right now. So you start to talk about the actual real world numbers, and like 4,000 starts to not sound too bad,
Yeah. No, I was going to say kind of on that same thing, business email compromise. That's my favorite example right now because it's just so prolific. You mentioned earlier the count's going up. BEC the last 2 years outpaced ransomware just on pure quantity of claims. But on a BEC, I can't remember the last time I saw single mailbox breach. There's a law firm actually. This is probably 18 months ago. $65,000, I think, claim. That was the total claim costs were. Single mailbox BEC that had gotten shut down in like an hour. Like, it's just crazy. Any single incident is going to pay for itself.
And then one of my favorite ones right here, we never had a cyber incident before. And I always like to say, you never had a cyber incident that you know of.
Yeah.
It probably happened, right? But again, like everyone will get the slides. We have a bunch of objections in here and ways to start handling them or ways to think about them, right? There's always going to be objections, right? And as a provider, as a trusted advisor, as a value provider, you have to be able to talk about those objections in a business impact kind of way, right? Like, you can't just say it's going to happen to you, because it's never happened to you. How it's going to happen to you, right? Like, you have to give it to them in terms that they understand, in ways that they can handle without making them feel fearful of it. There's a difference between being fearful, right? So we're gonna wrap it up because we only got a few minutes left. Time flies whenever you're.
We're gonna have to do part 3. It's a trilogy now.
All right, so this is what we talked about, right? Like, my claims will be denied if we're not perfect on our insurance, right? So what should we? It's mostly. You told me that was mostly false, right? Like, that was our conversation. But like, what should we do for ongoing compliance, right? So what in your perspective, what should we do as part of our compliance program?
One of my favorite little tricks, if you take nothing else away from this, right, is use teacher help desk line. People call in, I'm sick of this MFA thing, I need it turned off. No, we can't turn off MFA or it might void your insurance. I had my help desk telling people this at my MSP, and the one time the guy starts laughing, he goes, okay, shut it off now, I don't have insurance. And then at that point, the BCAO was like, oh crap. But from that standpoint is pushback on adjusting the controls, right? Look, we attested to this stuff. We have to keep it on. Document it. Okay, if we're turning this off, I do need to have it in writing. Remember on your insurance application, you checked it, that sort of thing. Another one where a lot of people get into trouble. So notice of circumstance, that means you're telling the carrier that something might have happened. It's not a claim. It's not going to do your write up or anything like that. but there can be requirements on it. So you're investigating something that you think there might have been a breach, that the client needs to notify their carrier, because there's certain things if you waited too long where you can't file a claim at that point. So be aware.
Yeah, I think part of this, right, where the value that you bring is like in a good change management process, right? That's something that I've always harped on security as a whole, right? Like when you know there's something that we should be doing, someone says, I don't want to do that anymore. Well, a good change management process will work you through and give it also, like to your point, it gives your help desk a line to use to where it's not on them. It's like, hey, I can't change it. I have to go through the change management process.
Right.
It's going to be on so and so to get this done. So you're not denying them, right? You as a person isn't denying them.
Yeah.
The process is denying this. The process we agreed upon. Excuse me. But like, it should be noted that like this change, how long the change is going to happen for, what's the outcomes of the change, the perceived outcomes of the change, and what's the negative outcomes of like any good change management process would have that. That's the same thing here. We're talking about like you have insurance requirements. So like if you change this or you turn this off, like you're voiding your insurance requirements.
Yeah.
It gets approved by the owner or the whomever at the client is in charge of these process changes.
Yeah, exactly. And then it's documented, well documented at that point, because ultimately too, as MSP, you got to cover your butt. So
yeah, and like there's been many times where we had like attorneys call in and be like, hey, I don't want such and such, like it's this product you put in place, like let's say it was our PAM solution, right? I just want to be able to install whatever I want. I'm like, all right, well, we're gonna have to go talk to one of the partners at the firm because that's our point of contact for change management, and they just go, never mind, close the ticket. Because like they wanted no pushback from us. They thought they weren't going to get pushback, and then so but after you go through this a few months with clients, like those tickets, they tend to stop.
Yeah.
So you have less tickets to worry about as well.
Make insurance the bad guy. That's what we're here for.
Yeah.
So just because we're down to the wire, internet-facing resources get scanned. So we're generally seeing carriers do it about quarterly. So just be aware from that standpoint. Unpatched stuff, Exchange being open to the world if you still have Exchange servers. And I say that as a certified Exchange admin. Breaks my heart, but kill your Exchange servers, folks. It's 2025. It's time. But that's one of the biggest things that they'll flag you on, and that can impact your rate heavily.
Yeah, for sure. And like a lot of nowadays will do regular vulnerability scans against the IP addresses from your business and send you reporting and say you have to go fix this. Like I've gotten many tickets about those, right? All right. We have one question left, but before we do, I'm going to get into the resources area. So if you get a link to the webinar, this slide's going to have a bunch of links to the pricing calculator I talked about, our cyber insurance guide, a toolkit that we put together with some marketing materials, all kind of other fun stuff. A link to Dustin and I's insurance webinars, and me and I think Altul did the first one, but me and Dustin's webinars as well, so you can have some historical context. And that's it. We have one question left, Dustin. So, and I can answer this one. It says, how many of the companies that pay the ransom actually get the data back? And I would tell you, no clue. It's hard to tell, right? Because people don't report whether or not they pay or not. They should be, right? The FBI asks that you do report that data. People don't report it, so I have no clue. But I could tell you in my line of work I did, it was probably a less than 20% chance that they wouldn't get their data back. Most attackers know, or threat actors know, that if they get a reputation of not providing data, that they won't get paid, right? They'll get a bad reputation in the community. So they are incentivized to provide data, but it's not 100%. And I have had some clients get burned before on that.
That kind of tracks with, off the top of my head. The bigger issue that we've seen has been the double extortion.
Yeah.
Where the stuff gets, leaked anyways, or they come back again asking for more money kind of stuff.
Yeah. There was, I think one time we tracked. We tracked like 7 ways they extort you during one. There's the ransomware, there's the data exfiltration, there's the client reputation thing where they say they'll reach out to clients. There's threat of going to regulatory bodies, right? Where they'll say like, all right, well, we're gonna go to the Office of Civil Rights because we're gonna go to them. So like they keep extorting you over and over again until you stop paying, they do whatever, right? But tracking gets hard. People don't report it, so that's a little difficult. But yeah, it is a reality. And like the other thing you have to think about too when you're paying is like, are you violating the Office of Foreign Asset Control, right? OFAC. OFAC is not somebody you want to cross. when dealing with that, because there are serious consequences. They find out you gave money to a known terrorist organization.
Insurance incident response has very robust checks for that because we're insurance and we're scared to death of regulations. So
yeah. Well, Dustin, we're a minute over, but I will give you some time to plug Beltex, how people can get in touch with you, and everything before we wrap up.
Yeah, I saw my email went out there, Dustin at beltexins.com. And we have our own cyber policy that your customers can get, and it brings you, the MSP, into the claims process. And we also have what I like to think is a pretty sane set of underwriting controls, awesome rates, all 50 states. And then we also we have almost 50 other carriers that we do insurance for, both your customers and for MSPs. And right now the market's going kind of crazy. We have seen prices going up. It's starting. I don't think it'll get as bad as it was in 2021, but it's definitely, keep your eyes open, look at multiple options every year, because you're going to start seeing everybody going up, tighten up, more controls coming out. So
awesome. Well, Dustin, always a pleasure to have you on and have you talk insurance. I know it's not the hottest topic to talk about, but you do a fantastic job of explaining it. And everyone out there who joined us, thank y'all for joining us. If there's anything I could do for you, reach out to me, rbergeron at sherweb.com. Find me on LinkedIn and ask questions. That's what I'm here for. So appreciate everyone. Thank you, Dustin, for coming again. Have a good one.
Absolutely. Have a good one. Bye.